It is 12 o'clock. Should we start? I would, excuse me, I'll bring to order this Mobile GR Commission meeting, February 6, 2025 at 12 o'clock. To members of the public, this commission provides input on mobility-related activities and programs to staff, makes recommendations to the City Commission on policies related to these activities. As members of the public, we have two opportunities. You can provide comment. You can provide comment related to items on our agenda during the first public comment period. And at the end of the meeting, you can provide general comments. We're not able to respond to your feedback. However, we do use those to inform our decisions in the future. So thank you. Roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Lunger?
Here.
Commissioner Wynn?
Here.
Commissioner Patton?
Here.
Commissioner Whistling?
Here.
Commissioner Mathis?
Here.
Commissioner Nienhuis?
Here.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Sesa is excused. Commissioner Pawelka?
Here.
Commissioner LeGrand? Thank you.
All right, first order of business are the approval of the minutes from January 22nd. They were in our packets. Are there any corrections or comments to be had?
I'll motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right. Any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. We'll move into public comment on agenda items. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak, now is your chance.
Sweet. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you all. My name is Christina Colby. I'm the Executive Director for Neighbors of Belknap Lookout. You'll see in your packet that you guys did, the department did a review of our residential permit parking program in Belknap. And I just wanted to thank Mobile GR for jumping into action on that. I just thought it was time for a review on the program, and within a week, they already had a plan to get it going. So I just wanted to give them kudos for that fast action on that. So thank you all.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? All right, seeing none, I'll close that public comment. Next, we can move on to actually discussion items. And it just so happens the first item is residential parking permit policy discussion.
Hello, Commissioners. Christina beat me to the punch. I wanted to give her major kudos because she initiated a door-to-door effort to reach the residents of Belknap Lookout, and we really appreciate it.
Can you speak a little more into the microphone?
Yes. So Christina initiated a door-to-door effort to reach the residents of Belknap Lookout in December, January, mind you. So we really appreciate that and the opportunity for that input. That is also why there was a little extra time before we brought this issue back before you, because she came to us and we wanted to incorporate that data into our analysis and recommendations for the program. Next slide, please. Just an overview of what I'm going to review today, a little about the RPP program. You are all familiar with the RPP program, so I'll be very brief with that. Some key concerns that we heard in the process when we introduced the potential for 2 new RPP zones at a conceptual level last spring, those being on the west side and in Heritage Hill. How we responded to those concerns and identified potential changes and improvements to the policy based on all of your recommendations, based on what we heard from residents, and then the proposed policy changes themselves. Next slide. So, Mayor LeGrand, this is largely for you, as most of our commissioners have heard me talk about this program several times at this point. So please feel free to jump in with any questions that you have. The residential parking policy program was introduced in 2013 to allow residents to request priority access to the public right-of-way near their home for a small fee. As you can see, we have a couple very small segments with this zone, and then in Belknap Lookout, a larger zone, and this was largely in response to Corewell Health employees parking there and walking across the bridge to have free parking. So that was initiated by residents there. We've had different levels of interest over time and made multiple changes to the policy in the past. So one of the primary changes that we made and we're now revisiting was in 2021, we had been doing biannual citywide residential parking counts for a couple years. And so we pivoted to looking at the data from those counts to identify areas with a significant transient parking problem and to introduce the concept of the RPP to those areas. Next slide. So this is that process. So we would review the data for potential eligible zones, bring that to the neighborhood associations and to our commission, discussion item, action item, and so on towards a city commission vote and implementation. Absolutely.
Yeah, first of all, a lot of the, street level resistance I hear to this is about the fee. I get that we've got costs that we want to cover, and presumably that's basically what it comes down to, but has there been discussion about, okay, so the area where Corewell is parking, maybe there's a lot of pressure there, but if this is a tool we could use in, say, Heritage Hill, and we just said, fine, it's free, and we'll give everyone annually, we'll just mail you out these stickers and to every residence in Heritage Hill, and we'll also mail out 2, visitor passes that you can use when your kids come to visit you on the weekend. How much can that really cost? And the immediate benefit I can see to that is it would alleviate people's, it would eliminate resistance to the program. Logically, it seems to me like who's going to be against having to slap a sticker in your car that identifies your car as a Heritage Hill neighborhood resident. And then if we did things like, reduced parking on one side of a street, people wouldn't necessarily freak out because they'd be like, oh, right, I get it. I'm going to be able to park here, and the random people who want to walk to Donkey Taqueria half a mile from here don't have that sticker on their car. Therefore, thoughts on that? I get there's cost, but how much cost can it be?
Yeah, and I have been that person parking in the residence to go to Donkey Taqueria, admittedly. So that's a great question, and it's really one of the central questions that we were both asked and that we had internal discussions about. Broad level, our sort of philosophy is that people are not entitled access to the public right-of-way, and it's important to put some price on that. There are fee waivers for income-eligible people, and as I'll move forward, you'll see that our fee, which is $15 every 6 months, we believe to be very reasonable. We also understand that there would be a significant demand if people could get a sticker to park in front of their house for free. So it was a challenging decision to come to that, but looking at the practices in other cities, it is our recommendation to have some fee to also help us recoup some of the costs of administration. And this is not a cash cow for us. This is a real loss leader that takes significant time to administer. So we would like people to have some skin in the game for having priority access to the public right-of-way immediately in front of their home.
Okay. I could see a couple arguments back. One is if you just gave one to everybody in Heritage Hill, if you said, fine, Heritage Hill, we're doing this, you had a defined boundary, they all get property tax bills, you could mail them out the sticker with their property tax bills. Again, how expensive could that be? And if...
You get renters as well.
Sure.
As the landowner.
Sure.
We do see a lot of turnover in some of these neighborhoods as well. So it would be the kind of keeping up with administration with current residents.
Sure.
Rather than an application.
Sure. I guess the other, libertarian pushback I might have would be, sure, I don't have a right to park on the right-of-way, but I have an obligation to mow that curb strip, which I don't own. So maybe it's a way to compensate me for mowing the curb strip.
Noted.
Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to hold up your presentation, but for your benefit, there was some comments about pricing, although what I gleaned from the public that came and wrote in emails, et cetera, was more the feeling that we were imposing this restriction on them without their sort of input and not necessarily approval, but agreement that would be necessary in those communities. So when we went to a data-driven, and then it was decided based on the data to create these RPPs in certain neighborhoods, that's when we got the pushback. So getting more neighborhood discussion, agreement, the associations, I think would help.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to ask, before I forget, because the mayor's question made me interested in the exemption for low-income individuals. What's that set at? How many do we receive, and what's the process for verifying? Because that, to offset some costs, that's probably a cost on staff administratively to have to process it all.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll invite Andrea up here if she happens to know the answer to that. Otherwise, we'll get back to you on that. And it is at no cost for income-eligible individuals.
I'm sorry, I meant like the cost of city staff to have to how do you verify the process for verification?
Sure.
Because it can be fairly lengthy and take some documentation and things like that.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look at all the work our front office
Okay.
does and crunch some numbers.
Erin, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Please.
So thank you for all your questions around costs. These are questions that we also had some conversations about. One of the things that you should know about the residential parking permit program is that we don't have a whole lot of examples of it. We've done it a few times. There's not a whole lot of examples. And the ones that we've done, as you all know, in the last few years, our world is different and technology moves faster than this program has been updated. So one of the things I just want to kind of put in the back of your minds is that as we move forward with a revised program, which is up to y'all to help us put that together, one of the opportunities here is we can try something and see what works. Because we don't have over and over and over examples. So some of the things Erin's going to talk with you about today is going to talk through some of these questions that we've all had, and also we're pulling from other kind of sister communities that look a little bit like Grand Rapids and what they've done in their program. So this is a little bit of something us figuring out, kind of building this plane as we fly it, as you might hear me say a lot. So that's one of the things that's going on here. So I really appreciate you guys kind of bringing these questions to the forefront because they all kind of matter as we're trying to build a program that works for the community. So I hope that helps. And the other thing that hasn't popped up in your questions yet, but is a huge cost, is the cost of enforcement. So that's kind of your biggest dollar amount. All of these other things, we can find, ways to put that in our body of work. The cost of enforcement and what our enforcement team and your enforcement lead is sitting in the back of the room right now, and he'd probably give a big thumbs up. Never mind, he's not saying anything. So, that is a huge cost to any program, any sort of permitting program, anytime you put meters in, anything like that, you're talking about enforcement costs and what that looks like. So
That's
just
a fair
another
point.
thing
Thank
to
you.
remember. But keep going, Erin, you're doing great.
Next slide, please. So as we heard in the spring, individuals did not agree with the definition our policy stated as what a transient parking problem consisted of, and we heard from a lot of folks that there's not a parking problem here. That initiation process that was kind of too top-down, back please, wanting it to be easier to include guests, and then the cost piece. Next slide. So we went through both by surveying and having conversations with communities, an evaluation process of peers, and found that a majority of our peers have a more resident-initiated and led process that might be through a petition or through petition followed by ballot or tallying process. And there's a range of approaches for guest permits. And as I mentioned, a majority of the cities do charge more than Grand Rapids. Next. Christina mentioned, we conducted a survey of the Noble neighborhood. A majority of permit holders and respondents had a neutral or positive impression of the program, believed that the program should continue, also found it inconvenient for their guests to park, and could park on their block or in their driveway. Next. So this leads us to key proposed changes that we are suggesting. First of all, a resident-led initiation process. We learned that us sharing out some data is not our most effective approach, and even if we intend it to be the first step in a very engaged process, that people will see a map and get concerned and let us know, which is, it's democracy working, which is great. But we don't need that sort of snowball at the initial stage. We want our residents to tell us what they want. So our proposed threshold for this is 60% or more of residents. We've seen 50 to 75% in other communities, so I'd be interested in your feedback and what feels appropriate, if something else feels appropriate. And this would be a survey led by residents. We could provide support and information for what that would look like from 10 or more street segments. I'll show you what that looks like. And we'd have the same process for modifying a zone, dissolving a zone, any sort of expansion process. So that's the main kind of big change. And I'll talk through that again, show you what those segments look like. There's some other ones too. So providing complimentary guest permits to permit holders. Another significant one was the option for them to apply for additional permits. So it's not one per resident driver's license holder. You could apply for another one if your parents come frequently, if your kid comes frequently, if you have a significant other, et cetera. Short-term permits, these will actually stay at 24 hours, but people will be eligible to purchase multiple at once. We have now up to 6 permits per household, up from 4 because of the city's zoning changes. And as mentioned, residents can hold more than one.
I have a couple questions.
Please.
First, it seems to me in a perfect world, this would be the kind of thing that it would be a lot more user-friendly if you could essentially go up to your bedroom, go onto a website, say like, oh, my mom's come, and then print out a permit. I hope we've got the capacity to do that, as opposed to, oh, I've got to go to 1120 Monroe, take an hour out of my day because mom's coming for the weekend.
Yeah, and I'll again let Andrea come up if she has any suggestions for that. So we are, I cannot use any of the technical words for this, I apologize, but we are using a license plate-based program for enforcement currently, and I believe that we could make an adjustment to the program that would allow residents to apply for that through that sort of similar process. It's part of the transition that we're making.
Cool. The other question I would have is, if you've got a corridor where you think that parking is problematic for safety reasons, for multimodal transportation, whatever, it's suboptimal to have the status quo.
Yeah.
A lot of those options to reduce parking are then going to create pressure that wasn't there before.
Yes.
So have you thought about how those two things would talk to each other? So for example, if, the city decided, oh, we're going to eliminate parking on one side of Wealthy Street, you're going to create pressure. So how would those two things talk to each other? Has there been any thought about that? Like you say, citizen, resident-led initiated process, but I could see a scenario where you'd say, like, if we're going to do a major parking shift in a neighborhood or we're proposing it, that might trigger, a suggestion that we do this survey and we start the process.
Yeah, that's a fantastic thought. And my understanding is that our engineering department and Juan Torres do a wonderful job of sort of individualized outreach and engagement to residents that are going to be impacted on any sort of significant public right-of-way modification. So if we were in coordination with them, we certainly want to make materials that are easy to follow, engaging, and educate them on the process in a way that is minimally burdensome for them, as well as connect them with their neighborhood association if they aren't already. Yeah, I think we could have a process to kind of put those two together. Next slide. So I talked through this as our current zone development process, and you can go to the next slide. And here are our proposed modifications to the process. So starting in that top left corner, residents would notice an issue, do that petition for an RPP zone with 60% support of residents. We do have the means to verify that, and we would, of course, if there was any outreach to us, provide the information, tools, templates, et cetera, available for that. We would internally review and evaluate that zone, the parameters of it, bring it to our Mobile GR Commission, as well as solicit public input, because we know that we will get public input early on regardless. But in addition to that, conduct really thorough outreach to impacted households. This would be a mailer, this would be digital engagement. Move to an action item, and the action item is not ultimate approval. It is moving to continue up to City Commission into a public hearing. City Commission would set the hearing, notify of the hearing, hold the hearing. We would be meanwhile still continuing to get public input via other channels, and then also get that through the hearing process, and then make a recommendation to City Commission with all of the information sort of gathered and synthesized, so that they can make an informed vote. Before we go to that one, any questions on this process?
I could at least see an argument for considering the residential petition thing being at a lower threshold, but then also having a gatekeeper function for, I mean, my Donkey Taqueria example would be a good one. If there was some city portal that let people vote on it, just like, you vote on your favorite bar in Grand Rapids, then if you were, a regular at Donkey Taqueria and we're proposing to make all of the parking on James Street permitted, you might be like, well, what the heck? Like, then I can't go to Donkey anymore. Or if you're a Donkey employee. So if we had a fairly open-sourced place where we could collect that data and have, I don't even know about giving veto right, but at least if there was some kind of way to publicly share, okay, the residents want this, but you've got a potential common pool problem, right? Like if you act like the only people who get a stake in this are the people who live near the parking spaces, that's not the only stakeholder in the conversation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and that's exactly the challenge to sort of balance here, right? Like we don't want to give people free unlimited access to the right of way. We don't want to impose a burdensome fee. We don't want to make it hard for people to connect with businesses. And our outreach does include a sort of buffer zone around the proposed zone. I don't remember the exact thresholds, but we could certainly communicate about it more widely. I think we'd need to understand what that process would look like and how we make sure we're understanding which residents are weighing in and who else is, but that's great feedback.
Yeah, just maybe a clarification. So when you say 60% support, so are you saying if 10 people respond, we only need 6 to say we need it, or you need 60% of the residents or the area to respond?
That's a great question, and I have an answer for you if you can move
Okay.
to the next slide. So, and this is another thing like that 60% threshold that we would love your input and discussion on. This is not an example from Grand Rapids. We don't want to scare anybody with maps about RPP. This is from Ann Arbor. If you can go to the next slide, please. So in this example, if we have a major traffic generator, next slide. Street segments, next slide. That's okay. So the area between those purple dots would be a street segment defined as both sides of residents on both sides of the street. Next. So we're proposing a 10 segment threshold for consideration of RPPZ, residential permit policy zone. So that think we'd like for this to be something that supports neighborhoods and significant traffic generators, so that has a little bit of a requirement for something beyond someone wanting immediate access to their home, but isn't too large. So again, would like feedback on that, but that's sort of the threshold for that. And we would be able to verify how many residents are within that area, to the number of signatures received.
So you're saying you would want 60% response?
60 petition by 60% of residents.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, knowing public sort of interaction and initiation, it does seem high. To be able to try to get 60% of the neighborhood to respond. Most people only respond when they don't want something,
Yes.
as opposed to when they do want something. So,
Yeah, and that's where a resident petition comes in, because we're just hearing from people who are making.
which is your no-win situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that, I mean, we were just this morning talking about this. This is a really challenging question. 60% is a significant amount. If we were to say something like 25%, that's also far from a majority of residents. And
Right.
if that's our threshold, and then we know that we'll hear mostly from people who are opposed to it, we don't really have an understanding of, where the majority of residents sit
Right.
on it. So, yeah, it's a very challenging.
So you said the partner cities that we studied, or sister cities that we studied, were between 50 and 75%.
That's correct.
I personally enjoy or like the 60% number because, in theory, if it's a large enough problem, people will care about it and respond. Again, in theory, we'll see how maybe it works in practice, but it is a challenging question.
Yeah.
I was going to add, I appreciate that. I agree. I think 60% is a good place to start. I do think it will have its own challenges no matter what you do. Question, when you say of residents, it is actual, like if there's a household with 6, all of those residents count? Is it above a certain age, or is it per parcel? Because that could be a big distinction.
Say it again.
How are you counting residents? Are you counting them per building, so per residence, like residents? Or is it if you have a duplex with 12 people, because we can do 6 people per, do all of 12 count? Or what if 3 are
Yeah.
kids? Like, how are you making that distinction?
It is per residence, and I did not know we had the ability to do this, but we can find that out so that we are ensuring that we're reaching out to all residences in an area. And then the 6 threshold it can be a starting point if one person wants to pay for 6 RPP permits to park their 6 vehicles, and this is a college student and they have 5 roommates, and those roommates are upset. We can make a note in their file, and when we revisit, this is administered biannually. Potentially change the criteria. We could make an exception and really look at those on an individual basis. It's a valid concern. I expressed concern and had some of my colleagues really talk with me about this. But I think those cases are going to be so individual and specific that it's something that we could address without that being a very significant administrative burden.
Forgive me, Max, you got something?
Well, just quickly, so the way that we would do this, and this is open to, discussion if you want, but the way we're planning on doing it is we can get a mailing address for every residence, and it would go off that. So if there are 4 people living there that are getting mail there, we would count them as 4, including the landlord, if it's a rental, for instance. So that would be 5 people.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. With rentals, landlords are going to want to have a say, so
Yep, so
we're including them.
The theory is that's how we would count for
Yeah.
each residence, is anyone who gets mail at that location, including the landlord.
So with the parking, I mean, are there time restraints, or can I just park there all day?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can you go to the next slide. I'll just quickly go through this and then answer your questions. Not a lot of significant changes to the permit types. We do eliminate the caregiver permit type because residents would be eligible to apply for more than one, and they could still request a needs-based waiver on that. And what? That's the only change. Next slide. Previous slide. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, no problem. I was just wondering, are there time restraints to the parking, like 60-minute limits or 2-hour limits or whatever?
So that's a great question, and this is where the question of enforcement becomes really central as well. So that's something that we would want residents to have provided information about, recommendations for, something that we would look at more closely. And if this is something very complex where we believe there's some sort of supplemental study or us going out and doing some counts, we can add that as well to really understand where that demand is and then set the policy according to what the requirements are.
I remember this
If that
discussion.
fully overlaps with our enforcement hours, you're welcome to greatly expand recommendation for our enforcement hours and how many enforcers we have. But that would be,
I remember us having this discussion about Monroe Center about a year ago or so, and the challenges of parking in front of businesses and things of that nature. And I don't expect you to have the answer today, but the thing that I would want to know more about is if this approach is to go with no time restraints as of now, how does that affect small business in those markets, in that area?
Yeah.
How do those businesses continue to sustain as far as parking for their customers go when I can park in front of that business all day long without anyone ever bothering me and I'm at the house down the street and we take up 3 spots right in front of their front door, right? So I'd be curious to see what that looks like and if there's any feedback or anything from the businesses, how do they feel?
yeah.
About this happening where
Absolutely.
they have their business, as study provide for their families, and how important is it for them to have those parking spots available, or do we reserve spots in front of their business, or whatever, right? Whatever the options may be. But I'd be really curious to see going forward what kind of feedback we get from that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and that's, something that we would really want to dig into depending on what the traffic generator is. I lived in Chicago and we had no parking during Cubs games, specific signs, so I think there's a lot of different options, and we would absolutely want to incorporate the input of businesses and not just residents, and would do outreach to those immediately surrounding businesses as well.
Especially with the growing city and amphitheater and soccer stadium and, all the things that are going to affect different parts of the city. I'm really curious to see what kind of a response can we come up with to make it as fair as possible.
You have to bring those two things up.
They were there.
Just a clarification again, so if you can go up to 6 permits, but if there's only 4 people in that unit, then they would max at 4, right? Residential permits?
They could go up to 6 permits.
They could.
If they were looking at going above 6, we would sort of put a note in their account and revert back to the sort of like 1 per driver's license holder. We'd have the ability to do that. But this was in response to this sort of very significant demand for people to be able to have guests.
Which brings my other question, the non-driver residential permits. I mean, if you don't have a car and you're a non-driver, why would you need a permit?
I was just asking that question the other day, and I think, and I can get back to you with an absolute final correct answer, it allows people to purchase guest passes as well. So,
Well, that's guest permits, but
If you need to perhaps use a rental car or something like that and park outside of your house, I think that's where that might
it's
be handy.
Yeah, that, and it's primarily for guest passes. So if you don't own a vehicle, but you would like to have people to come visit you who do, and they can purchase guest passes. So you can't purchase guest passes unless you have you're part of the program. So that just lets you do that.
that's my slides. Other questions? Yes?
Aaron, yeah, I've got one question, kind of thinking about that 60%. I know that when we look at traffic calming, there does need to be I believe it's just over 50% of residents who sign off on a traffic calming study. I want to check if that's accurate first.
I was going to save some of this discussion for, but yes, so currently to get approval for traffic calming, you need a 60% response from the surveyed residents, and those that respond need to be 50% of those need to be yeses in for it to go forward.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to bring up one point that we struggle with that program, which is if you're a no vote in a primarily yes vote street and you vote no, you contribute to the 60% response, but then you're overwhelmed by the yes votes. So it creates a scenario where you're disincentivized to vote at all, and it becomes more advantageous for you to just not vote. So I just want you to think about that, because we are struggling with not wanting to incentivize people not voicing their opinion, and that being the best way for them to get what they want.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I ask about it, because I want to know, are we comparing the two? I think that there's a lot of overlap in terms of the impetus is going to be, I'm mad that people are speeding down my street. Now it's, I'm mad that people are taking up parking spots.
Yes.
And do we want to match similar thresholds, because we have that already.
Yeah, and actually, that's why I would think the 50% threshold for me intuitively feels better than 60, because when you say it's an important issue, who's the president of the United States is an important issue. Only 60% of people participate in answering that question. If there's maybe no more important question than that, and that maxes out at 60% participation, then a 50% yes means, that's a pretty high. I think 50% yes is a pretty high threshold, but keeping it at least at 50% means that a no can't be like, you didn't even hear from a majority of the people. So if we had a 25% threshold, that would be my obvious argument. If I was a no, would be you only heard from a quarter of the people. So keeping it above 50 has got that nice, we heard from a majority ring to it. But the reality of lack of participation means we'd be stuck in the status quo a lot, I think, with a 60% threshold.
Fair point. I see nods. Recommendation for 50% generally?
I like your comment that we're going to try this.
Yeah.
What's your review process? Is it every 6 months, or I forget?
So in your packet,
Yeah.
there's a draft, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, there's a full draft. And so the review process would be
I forget.
3 years for the full dissolution of a zone, if it's just been established by a majority of residents, and then 18 months for revisiting the parameters of a zone. So if it was going to be expanded or some other modification made to it.
How do we get to 18 months?
We
that
started at 3
your-
years and thought 18 months sounded a little bit more like what people would want.
That's courtesy of your director over here. I heard 3 years and I said, wait a second, we haven't tried this. Could we start with something shorter in case chaos ensues? And it seemed like maybe you remember a little bit better than I do. We kind of mapped out how long it would take us to kind of feel good about the data after it gets implemented.
Yeah.
And then what that looks like in 18 months gets you through, depending on when you start, the same season twice, here and there.
Yep.
And you can kind of look at how this is operating from a number of standpoints, including how is the enforcement, how is the feedback from the residents, and it would give us time as a team to talk with people and then also observe what's going on in the parking zone. So it kind of built in enough time for staff to do a little research while it's happening. Does that make sense? Does that kind of explain it, Aaron?
Yeah.
Can I, so I know we're discussing, I don't know if we want to vote on this whole 50 or 60% threshold question and then move on to other things. But I have another idea, which is I like the program. I would like people to be able to adopt it. The grumpy homeowner, feeling like, oh, now the city's going to come along and ask me for $15 for every car in my household. I wonder if we could think about having one free one per residence. Like, if you want to buy more, you can buy more, but one lets my mom park on the street and not feel like she got charged for parking on the street. Just a thought, like if we had an initial one for free, it might take a lot of the bad taste out of people's mouths. And then they could be like, we can probably just live with one. We can leave the pickup truck in the garage, but like.
Well, that's a good point, because we do this because there's limited parking available, correct? So if we're allowing people to get 6 per household, and that was kind of what I was driving at, someone could gobble up, the permits, and, the person that forgot to apply is now out of luck, or was on vacation or whatever.
And we could grant exemptions for
Yeah.
certainly one household.
But
to have
I
more
like
than
the idea
6.
that, people would probably say, well, one's free, I don't need 2 or 3, I can live with one. And maybe it would help spread out the number of permits that are available.
Yeah, it's
people.
a good idea. I'm going to push back on it because we're balancing resident wants with the sort of like cascading impact that this might have if this is something that's available to individuals as a free resource. That sort of significantly expands the, I think, geography that we would see residents wanting this, and the number of individuals parking near those businesses. And near, because this happens near generally areas where there's a lot of activity. So
I would also add to that, I think 6 permits seems like a lot for one household to have.
Yeah.
I think there could be a more realistic number that can be considered. And I would also add, I would be curious to know more about how employees are going to handle this as well. Do they get something to park outside the business that they're going to be working in for 12
Yeah.
hours today, or 8-hour shifts? And, how that affects them as far as parking goes. If there's no parking behind the building or a lot or, whatever, and they have to park on the street,
Yeah.
what does that look like if this household has 6 permits and they've used up all the parking?
that's a great question. Without wanting to not answer that question, it seems like we might want to have an additional discussion item with this, really like digging into a couple of these issues before we come forward with a policy. If I could request any additional questions or comments that you have, and we can really focus on those in a discussion at our next meeting. I'd like to be able to look back at some of these communities with these specific questions and examples, and also allow my colleagues to tell you all.
I think to Mayor LeGrand's point about the free pass, I think expanding it beyond residential and allowing the local business to have a few of those for their staff to use
Yeah.
and rotate based on shifts would be helpful.
Sure.
And then you have the local businesses get X amount, the residents get X amount, and we see how that plays out over the next 3 to 6 months.
It is a license plate-based enforcement process, so the passes are tied to individuals, and you'd have to
Okay.
specify that exception.
My wife and I owned a property up north of Muskegon, where in a community on Lake Michigan, and they had the same thing. And it's all based on a pass to get to the beach and to the community and the whole everything. But it was simply a little sticker we put in the window.
Sure.
That can be removed or taken out or laid on the dashboard so that it can be transferred a lot easier rather than being tied to a license plate. So maybe just something else to consider, especially from a staffing standpoint, where you're dealing with turnover and all these different things as a business. It doesn't make sense for me to put a license on every license plate of my staff, and then I lose 3 employees, get 3 new ones, then I got to go through the process all over again to, replace that. But if I've got something I can just stick.
Employees.
You shouldn't, but it happens, unfortunately, especially with restaurants right now. Like, we're seeing it around the clock, right? So thinking through an easier way of how I can do that, and even more so when I get the family, my mom lives 3 hours away. She's coming in from Chicago for the weekend, and I've got to go through this whole process. Can I just get something I can lay in her window?
Sure.
That can be noticed, and then I can take it back when she leaves on Sunday.
Agreed, because I don't know my mother-in-law's driver's license.
There you go. Same here.
I will say with that, you are going to make enforcement more difficult for them. Just with the license plate coming from that industry, doing license plate is going to be a lot faster than them getting out at every car and having to go find where that person put that permit. Did they put it in the same spot? Is it in the back window, in the front window? It's not where it's supposed to be. I think you're going to have more issues with somebody getting a ticket maybe when they shouldn't because they don't have it portrayed in the right spot, and when you add the license plate, it's right there. It's going to be quicker enforcement, and like you say, that's where your cost is for this program,
Well-
enforcement.
I mean, I get that. On the other hand, when people get tickets, they are paying for the enforcement. And like,
No, sir. Just real quick clarification, that is not how we pay for enforcement. Tickets go to the general fund.
okay.
Just
Well
real
then-
quick. So keep going, though.
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
ideas.
yeah. Okay, fair enough. So,
Be happy to take it instead.
yeah, no, I'd rather have it in the general fund. But, you know, it's also true that like lots of the world uses pay and display. I mean, that's the dominant model in Europe. It ain't that hard. You put it on your dashboard. And if I'm writing you a ticket, oh, I see, right. So like, yeah, I get the license plate thing. That's a world where nobody gets out of their car. I get that we're actually asking people to do what looked like parking meter enforcement in a previous iteration, but I'm not sure that having to get out of your car is such a compelling barrier that I don't want to be able to do, particularly the employee thing. I don't know how you solve the employee thing otherwise, because I've got businesses that have pretty significant turnaround. And, you know, if I had 6 of these passes, if I had 6 laminated passes at Long Road and they were up at the server desk, and when people came in for their shift, they knew they could go grab one, and if there wasn't one, then they had to go park on somebody's lawn. But like if they had them, if they were there, they could grab them and just go out and put them on their dash. That's a way to actually make it work for businesses. I have a hard time seeing how license plates work for businesses with fairly rapid turnaround employees.
Well, I would agree, as long as the rest of us agree, that I would take these back, as you suggest, and find you're not going to get 9 people, let alone 60% of any community to agree on anything you come up with, but do your best. Yeah.
Quick question, I guess. So this is called the Residential Permit Parking Program. Would there be in Grand Rapids areas potentially affected that include businesses? Because to me, this is kind of a moot point of, this is typically in Grand Rapids are how the city is laid out. Businesses and residential uses are quite separated. So I just would like to hear some feedback on that.
So I really like this point about how we're talking about residential permit parking. Lots of conversation, and internally, what we've talked about is like, are there other parking products that should be in the portfolio that look at things like employee parking and those kinds of things where you don't have an off-street facility. So next month, we're going to chat with you all a lot about parking operations. And I hear there's a couple of things we need to cover in that. And one is like the details in how our funding works and where it comes from. And then also how enforcement works today and the technology that we're using. And Debbie was bringing up some good points about like what we're using. And then also like talking with you all about the why we're using that type of work. So what I really encourage whenever we bring staff up here to chat with you all is to give you kind of all of the options that are out there. And as you bring ideas, we're happy to go back and take a look at those and then come back and say, here are your gives and gains. And a lot of time that's going to come back to funding and, labor resources, which is a solvable thing. It's just going to, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So there's going to be a cost associated somewhere, whether it's time, labor, redirecting our resources somewhere else. So I think all of these things, Aaron, maybe a last call. We're at 10 minutes till 1, and we've got 2 other very exciting things that we want you guys discussion on. This one, I know Mayor had just mentioned, should we vote on the 50% thing? This is open discussion at this time. We can bring it back to you. I think maybe we can bring it back to you for an action item next time, or we can bring it back for an additional discussion. And I think that would be a great thing for you all to direct us next steps and any other kind of closing comments. If you don't mind just watching time, if we could, if you all are okay with the next agenda item, but that could kind of be the closing things we might need to know.
I would just say, I think it's a testament to you all staff that, is it Christine from Belknap is here to acknowledge the partnership. So good work there. It was about a year ago that we sat at the library and got overwhelmed with people who misinformed and obviously concerned, and let's not forget that. So as we continue to communicate, I just continue to urge you to stress first step, pilot, flexible, that people understand that we're not telling them, that we're inviting them, and to have partners from the neighborhoods join us is going to go a long way. But I know you're going through a lot, so appreciate that. But let's stay as proactive as we can, communication to the public.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Just quickly as well, on the flow chart, I think you mentioned this, like there would be support from staff in terms of like getting the canvassing in the neighborhood, but maybe just make that explicit in there, because that to me would be a barrier, knowing that there would be staff support to help with that process would be helpful.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So what's the commission's feeling on, do we want an action item next meeting or more discussion?
More discussion.
More discussion.
Discussion. All right. We'll look forward to it. Thank you.
I'd recommend 55%. Just
Love it.
cut it down the
baby.
middle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So the next agenda item is bringing us back to a project that we piloted back in the fall, and we've now got our data, and we had a partnership with McGill University, and Trent here is going to talk with you about the outcomes of that program. And this was just really quickly, this was the Lime Access Program. So our vendor for our bike scooter share is Lime, and you see those little green bikes around. And we have one vendor. Some communities have multiple, but we have one here. And so Lime Access is the program where they subsidize the cost of a ride for eligible participants. We have had the Lime Access program open since the beginning of using this vendor, and Trent, you are going to walk through what that looks like today, right? Yep. So Trent's going to walk you through what that all the time program looks like. And then this pilot was a 60-day of further subsidy of that for eligible participants. So that's the little bit of overview of what we are doing there. And Trent's going to walk through both what we do all the time and then what this pilot looked at and the outcome of that. And we're excited to, kind of get some thoughts from you all on this program that we tried. One of the things I want to point out for you all is that with each of our programs, sometimes I forget to connect the dots for you all, but the city's strategic plan, which is put together, in combination with the city manager and the commission, one of the things that they do at the beginning of the year is they sit down with the city commission and they do a workshop. And this is, an open to the public workshop. And one of the things that happened at the workshop that just happened last in January is this overview of focus areas. One of the major focus areas in the strategic plan is micromobility. And it's part of the overall category of mobility. We've got micromobility, safety for different modes, and specifically for active transportation or non-single occupancy vehicle transportation, everything that kind of lives outside of driving a car. What does that, not that we don't look at car safety, just extra attention on other types of user safety. And so everything that we are bringing to you today is actually going back and touching on those focus areas and giving you a status update of where we are with these programs. And so that's why we have these particular programs in our portfolio. So just remembering that and the other piece with the focus on micromobility is that focus on the first and last mile challenge of transportation in our users. So that also looks at how can we solve that first and last mile issue with folks that are not using a single occupancy vehicle. So your micromobility is a piece of how we try to solve that problem. So that's a little bit of introduction. Trent, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the
Go for
intro. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Trent Serra, Mobility Planning Analyst at Mobile GR. As Jessica mentioned, I'm here to give what I'm calling a shared micromobility report, including both 2024 ridership and a bit of a review over the affordability program that we ran in late summer, early fall of last year. So next slide.
As a quick point of background, I know a lot of you are familiar with the program, and as Jessica already mentioned too, this was originally launched as a pilot in 2020, product of the Bicycle Action Plan to meet that first and last mile connection issue that we and many other cities have had. It was renewed as a long-term program after the success of the pilot in 2022 with Lime as our sole operator. We currently have a 50-50 split of e-bikes and scooters, as you've seen around the city, with a variety of discount options built into the system, including Lime Access, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, Neighborhoods of Focus, which have both been in place since the beginning, and then most recently a university student discount that we pushed out in 2024. Since 2021, I didn't have the 2020 data on hand. We've had over 360,000 unique riders in Grand Rapids, which I think is a pretty astounding number. So next slide. 2024 ridership. So we did see about a 4% increase year over year, about 20,000 trips, which we were excited to see. We almost reached that 500,000 mark that we were shooting for, but I'm pretty confident we'll get there this year. A couple better days with weather, and I think we would have gotten there. Just shy of 130,000 unique users in 2024. This was a little bit of a decrease from 2023. I do see a lot of encouragement in it, though, that we are seeing more trips. As another point mentions, the trips are going slightly longer, slightly farther, so we may have fewer users, but they're using the system more frequently. They're using it to get a little bit further and taking more trips, which I see as very encouraging. And our number of Lime Access users increased significantly, which I'll mention in a moment as well. And just as a note here, even though we do have that 50-50 split of bikes and scooters, we are seeing progressively more and more trips being taken on scooters. About 83% of all the trips taken in 2024 are on scooters. So even though we do have the same fleet size for both vehicles, more and more users are tending to opt for the scooters when available. Do I see a question?
Yeah, do we know time of day? Is there like trends when are they being taken at all? Is it that specific?
We do have time of day. I don't have that included in this presentation. I can definitely include that in our March update, though. Typically, we do see the biggest spike in ridership between about 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. There's a little bit of ridership that happens in the early part of the day when people may be getting to work or school. A little bit of ridership through the night as well, but typically that 5 to 10 is usually the peak. Next slide, please. This is just something I want to mention real quickly. I think there's generally a perception that micromobility is a tool for getting around downtown, for recreation, go to a concert, go to a sporting event, grab dinner with friends. And while that's certainly the case, there's a lot of activity in the downtown area in Grand Rapids. I wanted to point out that it's not the majority of our activity. 57% of all trips in 2024 began outside this zone, and almost 60% ended outside this zone, which just highlights the broad uses that people are using micromobility for, not just to get to areas of interest downtown, but to get to their neighborhoods, to get to their work, to get to school, to, do social outings with friends in different neighborhoods. So I thought that was an important point to mention. And as it relates, I'll answer your question in just a second, to Lime Access users specifically, only 13% of Lime Access trips in 2024 took place in this downtown area. So even more so when it comes to users with low financial means, they are even more likely to use it in the surrounding neighborhoods to get around. Yes.
Yeah, do you have data on what percentage of these trips ended in an actual collector spot as opposed to being dumped in the middle of the sidewalk?
It is, I don't have that exact number on hand. I know it's 99.99999% of them end up in a DPZ because you have to, otherwise you'll be fined in the app. There was a first-time warning for violations if someone parks outside of a DPZ, but literally the app will not even let you end the ride in most cases if you're not at a DPZ location. So some of those instances may be just from GPS drift of someone being able to park across the street if the bubble is a little bit too big for the DPZ, but by and large it's very difficult to end a trip outside of one of our parking zones.
Thanks.
Next slide, please. Now Lime Access. I'm going to give a quick background on this too, and then we'll jump into more of the affordability program. So this is a built-in discount program. Users must apply and meet certain qualifications, namely being a participant in a federal state assistance program. There are different models in different cities in Grand Rapids. It's currently a 50% discount of all trips. Other cities, I believe Atlanta is an example that has a higher percentage discount, maybe 80%. And then other cities do it in different ways, with some having 5 or 10 30-minute trips per day for free for Lime Access users. Historically, there's been very little utilization of this program in Grand Rapids, even though it has been available from the beginning. Even over the first 3 years of it being available, there were only 121 Lime Access signups in Grand Rapids, and not all of them were even active. Which brings us directly into, next slide, the affordability program. The goals of which were very simple. We wanted to promote Lime Access. We wanted to increase the enrollment. We wanted to learn more about users in our community and identify areas for future improvement, especially when it comes to learning more about users. You know, we sort of anecdotally have an idea of who uses micromobility in Grand Rapids. You know, everyone has their certain perception of what a shared micromobility user looks like. And this is really the first opportunity we've had to do a real survey with users to not just learn their demographics, but learn about their trip purposes, the issues that they face using shared micromobility in Grand Rapids, and get a much better sense of that. So as Jessica mentioned, this ended up running as a 2-month program. The end date was a little bit fluid depending on how quickly the budget was eaten up by trips. It ended up running for 2 months. We changed our Lime Access model to 5 free 30-minute trips per day instead of just a blanket 50% discount. And then Mobile GR reimbursed Lime for that additional 50% of all of those trips to cover the additional costs and make it 100% free for users for those trips. We had $100,000 budgeted for it and ended up spending just over $85,000 over those 2 months. Next slide. Oh, you're good. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to offer one note on that, which is there was significant demand and we only didn't have the whole spend because they basically didn't bill us correctly. So it wasn't that there was not enough trips taken. It was that's
Yes,
sort of how they
exactly.
sliced and diced the data.
Yes, we were. Yeah, that's a good point. We were under the impression that we had actually exceeded the total budget for this project, and Lime was chipping in to help us out with the final extra of the cost. And then come to find out when we actually received the invoices that they were counting some of their actually operations hours in those numbers. So our actual trip cost was only the $85,000. The intake survey, I don't need to spend too much time here. I did review some of this in the fall. This is the first presentation I've done with all of the responses included. But just wanted to make a quick note to this that, and Max can correct me here, I think we pushed this actively on social media for 2 days to get these over 1,100 responses. So there was a lot of activity on this very quickly that we actually had to stop promoting the post because we were afraid of too many people signing up and our budget being eaten up really quickly by the program. Out of those respondents, 92% had never applied for Lime Access. Only about a third had access to their own car or truck. People were typically using it for commuting or social outings. Main barriers were cost and availability of devices. We had respondents ages 18 to 89 taking part in this survey, and 86% of those respondents had an annual income below $50,000. Next slide. So we said one of our main goals in this program was to increase our Lime Access enrollment. So before this pilot, we had 30 to 40 active Lime Access users in each month. And as you can see from that graph, that's in those kind of peak ridership months. If you look at the fall, winter, or spring, there's usually a lot less than that even. And during the program, over those 2 months, we had 1,400 new Lime Access signups, over 1,000 of which were actively using the program during those 2 months. And just about 34,000 Lime Access trips took place in 2 months. This brought us up to 7th on the global Lime Access rankings, just between Portland, Oregon, and New York City. So up with cities that have obviously much larger populations, much larger fleet. So for us to get in among those cities was pretty surprising and very cool to see. And during that time, 17% of all the trips in Grand Rapids were taken by Lime Access users. Next slide. I wanted to make a quick note here that we didn't, run this program all on our own. Lime was a great partner for it. Chris, our local operations manager, is here as well. And they were very helpful in this and connecting us to some researchers at McGill University in Montreal who were already funded by the Mobilizing Justice Research Partnership in Canada to look at equity programs and micromobility and see what kind of impact they have. So they helped us with drafting the intake survey, doing pulse surveys during the program, post-program survey, interviews with program participants, and then also analyzing the survey and ridership data to assess the impact. So I just wanted to make a quick shout out to Lime and McGill for their help with this. Next slide. So what did we learn from these surveys, from the ridership? Well, we learned more about our Lime Access users. We learned that we have a nearly even split of male and female users, the majority of which are employed either part or full-time. Another 24% were unemployed and actively looking for work, and I'll make a reference later to how this program actually helped some of them get a job, which was very exciting to see. And 65% of them did not have any sort of access to a private mode of transportation. No car, truck, not a bike, not a scooter, nothing. So if you think of removing micromobility from these people's daily lives, they are completely dependent on where they can walk or where they can take a rapid bus on a fixed route. So micromobility plays a really key role for getting them a lot more flexibility in getting around the city. That is not subject to the fixed routes of the rapid or the timings of their schedules. 90% of the users reported being satisfied with the shared micromobility program in Grand Rapids and its service area and how it's run. 85% reported feeling secure and safe while using the program. 96% reported improved access to economic opportunities, and 94% reported improved access to social activities, which were a couple of the main themes that we saw in the interviews. Next slide. We also saw some shifts in ridership. Not surprisingly, if you're offering free rides, people rode a bit longer. So Lime Access users before this program typically rode for maybe an average of like 10 minutes, and during the program they rode for 17 minutes. So we got to see people go a little bit further on their trips. And they traveled 3 times farther and rode 3 times longer throughout the program in total trips than Lime Access users before. Lime Access trips per day is something I think that's really important. I wanted to key in on here. So before the program, we had an average of, maybe 6 Lime Access trips a day. Very, very low utilization. During the program, that jumped up to 423 trips on average. There were days with a lot more than that. And post-program, and I think this is actually the most exciting stat here, is in the 2 months after this, even with the weather getting colder and not as hospitable to riding a bike or scooter, we still had almost 300 Lime Access trips per day, which I think really shows that this is, of course, impactful while the trips are free, but even once it reverted back to the 50% discount, people had seen it as such a valuable way of getting around that they continued to use it. We also saw some great shifts in trip purpose, increases in trips for social outings, commuting, and shopping. And mode substitution. So these are the percentage of riders who use shared micromobility at least once instead of taking one of these other modes. So 85% of the users said that at one time or another they used micromobility instead of walking to wherever their destination was going to be. 58% did that instead of taking a taxi, Uber or Lyft. 55% did that instead of taking a rapid bus or the Dash, and 47% did so instead of taking a private vehicle of some sort. Next slide. These are some of the quotes and highlights from the interviews, which I think are really valuable. So interviewees felt appreciation for the city. Quotes here, I felt appreciated, valuable, and awesome. It shows that the city cares about us. The city cares for its community. A lot of gratitude among the participants for running a program like this. Some call outs too of transportation cost savings. So respondents reported saving an average of what ended up being $108 on transportation costs over that 2-month period. Some reported even higher amounts of savings and some less, depending on how they typically got around before the program. Obviously, if someone was generally walking to get to destinations, they didn't necessarily save a lot of money. They maybe saved a lot of time to get around to those destinations. Improved access to job interviews and college courses for training. This program relieved economic stress, made my daily commute and errands more accessible. I love you guys because you helped me get a job and keep a job. I really thank you, and even as going as far to say you guys gave me a job, by running this program. Next slide. So now the big question on all of our minds has been, what do we do now that we ran this program? It ended in September. We saw, some good ridership still in the fall. Obviously, it's dipped down over the winter. So what should we be working on now? So we obviously want to discuss options for a future affordability program. What other incentives and funding can we put toward this to maybe run another program this spring or summer, bring this back in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis, maybe as part of our annual budget. Is there a way to maybe restructure Lime Access to one of the different models to better serve residents in our community and continue to learn about ways that other cities have made micromobility more affordable? And then in general, we want to reflect on the program performance. So we want to assess our service area and fleet split. We've gotten a lot of resident comments about expansion in the Northeast. So that's something that we've already been looking on, of where we can add more DPZs in service area. in the Northeast area. And then fleet split, I mentioned our distribution of rides compared to the 50-50 fleet split. Is there a different model that we can look to for that that's going to serve our residents better and meet a better demand of trips? And then on a more general note, we want to discuss, the program goals and metrics in our KPIs with Lime, and they're going to be providing us with a KPI report of how the program has gone based on the metrics that are lined up in our contract with them, which I'll hopefully be bringing back some report on in March or April to you all. That concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions or hear any comments.
Any questions?
Just a comment. Fantastic job on this. It sounds like a fantastic success that we definitely should be publicizing and or continuing to publicize. Anytime that we're in a list with Portland and New York, we're probably doing something right, hopefully. It also, to me, sounds like a very efficient use of our of budget. I mean, just crunching numbers, $600,000 annually to help more of our residents get jobs and get around without, putting wear and tear on our streets or taking up parking spots. Sounds like a fantastic opportunity for us to continue on the success, continue with the success. So thanks again.
Are you looking at increasing the number of scooters and reducing the number of bikes based on or not?
Potentially, yeah. It's an option we're looking into. It's one of the key things when the program was launched as a more permanent program in 2022 is that we wanted to have a 50-50 split of bikes and e-bikes and scooters. That was for a number of reasons, one of which is to promote active transportation by the use of bicycles, which we do still see as an important part of this program and the purpose that it serves. Even if someone is using a scooter, they're generally walking to it instead of driving to it, and they're walking from the scooter to wherever their destination is. So there's still an active element even with that. Also, Lime has already been, transitioning a lot of the e-bikes to include a hand throttle option, which makes them a bit more accessible. If someone has some sort of physical disability that makes it difficult to actually work the pedals, they can just work the bicycle by a hand throttle similar to the scooters. So with all those changes, it's something that we've been considering is what would a better split be based on how people are using the system. We don't want it to be disproportionate that the bikes are just sitting around unused, but we're keeping them out for the sake of trying to, uphold some sort of value we had at the beginning of it. We want to be able to be flexible with how people are using the system and what best fits their needs.
Anything else? All right, good report.
I just have a couple of things to bring to y'all's attention. Thanks, Trent. That was great. So a couple of the next steps and what we would love to hear from you all in the future is we would love to have a bigger conversation about two things. One, public safety and safety of our users on our infrastructure. That's a big conversation that we've partnered with the fire department and the police department to speak with the public safety committee. And that's a continual, thing that we want to bring to the forefront and make sure that we are having that conversation with our first responders and what they're seeing on our facilities. So that's one thing to remember. So that is definitely dovetailed with this work to see how this is impacting our system, not only our infrastructure and maybe lack of appropriate infrastructure and amount of appropriate infrastructure for these devices. It's tough to mix them with other modes. They're not fast like a car. They're not slow like a pedestrian. So that is an industry-wide question. Where do you put the devices? The other thing is what Commissioner Powalko was talking about is the back of the napkin math you were doing. So my brain went straight to the math when I heard these results, and Aaron did some math for us. And so real quick,
Unofficial math.
Oh, yeah.
We want to report out.
Right. It's unofficial math. No. But when you think about riders that we have on our dash system and what our investment is on the DASH system, what the investment that the city puts forward in that program. And then the riders, let's call them trips, not the riders on the DASH, the trips taken on the DASH, like the boardings. And then the trips that you're seeing taken in micromobility. And then the investment we're making there and the number of what we're doing. So as we talk about trying to solve that first last mile problem and also helping provide access in our community to jobs, to other things where they're not only jobs where we make money, but when we get our folks into our community and they spend money, you saw folks doing social outings, errands, going out and spending money in our community, right? So making money, we love that when folks have employment, and we also love it when they turn around and reinvest that in their community. So as we're investing in these programs to help solve for that transportation challenge for those that don't have access, as you saw, to a single occupancy vehicle, which is the most convenient thing that you can do, right? When we're trying to solve for that equation and we are investing funds into those programs and how they're reaching, how the program is reaching, how they're working in the transportation system, and then also who it's helping service. That's one of those kind of bigger picture questions we would love to talk with you all a little bit when Erin's more comfortable with her math. We'd like to talk with you about kind of the bigger picture where we're putting our resources. And that includes where your staff has been spending time here at Mobile GR. So as we continue to talk about these types of programs, at some point I would love to have a bigger discussion around what is your thoughts about how we're investing money as a city, right? And of course, that's up to your city commission at the end of the day, but we do make recommendations to them, and you all also are welcome to make those recommendations. So that is something I just want to bring to your attention, and I would love to hear from you all.
Yes.
So thank you, Jessica. That's exactly, all of the things to think about. Couple things that I'll just think about out loud here. One is I rode scooters for a while, and then I concluded something bad was going to happen. And so I now have an e-bike, and it's a lot safer. And the number of people I've ever seen on a scooter with a helmet on, I can count on one hand. So I'm really concerned about the safety of the people who get on these things. I'm also concerned because nobody's my mom, who's 82 and has not great balance issues, lives with us and almost got railed by a scooter the other day in front of our house. So didn't happen with a bike. So I think that there are, some considerations about which mode we incentivize, and I think you get fitter if you're pedaling a bike is a concern, but it's also a macro concern of like what's a better fit with a bike path. So we have our big clan dinner once a week, and I have a lot of cyclists in my clan, and one of them said, I never want to see a scooter in the bike lane. Well, okay, then where are scooters going to go? So they're maybe neither fish nor fowl. Like, people tend to ride them on sidewalks. They tend to not ride them in bike lanes. If they ride in the bike lanes, they make the bikes angry. So I think there's a whole complex conversation we got to have there about like the tension between those two modes of transportation. The other thing is, and I'm sure you guys have already thought about it, I'm just partly saying it so we all think about it. If we're responding to people's behaviors, then it looks to me at first crack a couple things. One is if the average ridership length went up to 17 minutes and the cap was 30, well, if we wanted to get more bang for a buck, we could say 20-minute rides. And if we're trying to incentivize commuting, we could say 2 free rides a day, and after that you start paying, and that might get us some core functions. And then if you want to ride it the third time because you want to go to the bar, knock yourself out, but you have to pay for it, so to speak. I hope you don't knock yourself out, but in terms of, using limited resources, it's great to hear that people are using it to get to work. It's great to hear that they're getting that. All those demographics are fascinating and great. But then it's also true that, little editorializing here, I think our current EV tax credit at this federal level is maybe the worst incentive system I've ever seen in my life. Because why would I want to disincentivize rich people from driving EVs? Like, I don't want an income cap. If I think EVs are good, I should let everybody have the credit for driving an EV. Well, similarly, yeah, if there's a demographic here who can really help with this, that's great. But if we're getting people out of cars and if that behavior is happening, do we want to really talk about we're putting our money where our mouth is in a year or two and say, you know what, we're going to have a citywide program where it's really easy and you can get a free ride a day? Because if we got this whole residual effect, like a lot of people don't do things until they see whether they're possible. And so if you ride it once and you're like, wow, that was so much easier to get from point A to point B than walking. And it makes perfect sense to me. My bicycle is my substitute for walking. It's not my substitute for driving a car. So I use a bike to save myself time for things that I could also do walking. That's my primary substitution. So I get that it's a primary, that's exactly what your data is showing too, which doesn't surprise me at all. But then do I want doctors and lawyers and people living in the downtown core to think about using this as a substitute for cars? I really do, because there's lots of pickup benefits there. So if this is our primary group, great pilot program, great results, awesome. All of this is awesome. But I do think we want to think globally. If this is such a good benefit and if it's such a good thing to have happening in the community, then we should really think about taking the gloves off on income restrictions.
I just wanted to provide a quick response to that. We're still having the conversation about the future of this program. My personal hope is that we can move to another iteration, and what we would need to do a lot of in the meantime is, one, potentially do a similar program this summer, maybe revise the survey questions and understand the types of trips that people are having, and then have really big both set of conversations and research question about what are those potential models that could really support our community. Is it a number of free rides? Is it a different sort of tier for income eligible versus not? And there's so many ways that we could slice and dice that. And I would love to see $600,000 go to it, and us to be able to really maximize that benefit for our community. So we'll be discussing that quite a bit more.
That was a made-up number with no funding identified at this time. We really appreciate all of Aaron's math on the fly.
But if you displace 40 cars, you've paid for it. I mean, I get the money's coming from different sources, but cars cost $12,000 a piece. So any world where we can move people from a 2-car family to a 1-car family, let's say, is a huge wealth effect for that family. So.
Thanks. This is great discussion. Thank you all for coming along with us on this journey, and our fast math also. Thank you very much. I love these big numbers, by the way, that we talk about in looking at investment in these programs and things. So we'll talk more about what the current numbers are, what is an ideal state, and those types of things. And I would love to have you all work with us on what sort of, if any, suggestions and recommendations you'd like to make to the City Commission, because this is something that we spent, funding on, and there, I prefer it when it's a recommendation from you all after we've all had these discussions. So, okay. Thank you so much. That was your planning and micromobility team. Yes, go ahead.
I just want to make, I have a prior commitment at 1:30, so
Yeah.
I need to head out of here. So thank you all for your time and your hard work.
All right, so let's move on to transportation safety.
Okay, so this is your traffic engineer. And John is working on a number of programs that you all ask lots of questions about all the time. And when I go back to those focus areas that I was speaking about earlier that are part of our strategic plan and helping move forward in those, there are a couple of areas where those focus areas hit John's programs. And so the biggest one, of course, is mobility. And there's a couple of things in there: reducing speed and improving pedestrian and micromobility safety, which we were just, kind of teeing up perfectly. Also, the enhanced connectivity of and maintenance of bike and pedestrian paths, trails, and sidewalks throughout the city, and also looking at strategizing on community-wide carbon emission reductions for the transportation sector. And then the other one that John touches with his programs is collaborating with our regional strategic planning partners and activities like our friends over at Grand Valley Metro Council. John uses a different kind of funding on his side of the house. They are in a majority of what we call our Major Streets Fund is where a lot of this comes from, and also in partnership with our regional partners, federal funds, state funds, and some different things. And so that's where this is outside of your parking funds, right? So which are user fee based. And so this is shared responsibilities with our engineering department and with Public Works. So we have a portfolio that lives in John's side of the house that he's going to chat with you all and give you a nice big overview. I did check because I know that we had lots on today's agenda, and if you all have commitments at a certain time, we don't lose a quorum until what? Where?
6.
6, okay. So as long as you are at 6 or more, we can keep going. The other thing is, I know that there's technicalities, like you could technically sit here and have discussions, but I do think it'd probably be helpful if we adjourned once we don't have a quorum any longer. But also, we do not have something after 2 in this room, so you all have a little bit of flexibility, but also being respectful of your time, not knowing how much longer our discussion will be today.
2 o'clock.
Okay, cool. So John knows that, and thank you for being last and waiting so patiently. We're going to talk about traffic and transportation safety.
Sure. So yeah, it is a broad overview of the things that we touch upon. So please feel free to ask questions. I tried to front load some of the bigger items up front. So if we trickle off at the end, I don't think that's as big a deal as it could be. So my name is John Bartlett. I'm the traffic systems, or sorry, that's my old job. I'm the city transportation engineer. And I just wanted to go over my team real quick. So our traffic safety team is 6 individuals and myself. Kristen Bennett, who's our resident plan engineer. So she's our transportation projects manager. She leads our non-motorized efforts in the city, does a fantastic job with those, as well as having a wealth of knowledge in other mobility and transportation aspects. Dan Naderhode is our newest member. He's our traffic systems engineer, does a ton of plan review, does temporary traffic control management, and is doing a lot of our safety reviews right now. Ben Waldrop, our traffic engineer, oversees our traffic calming and pavement marking, annual pavement marking projects. And then I have 3 traffic technicians, Mike Langlois, Harold Dunlap, and Steve Lehman. They are our boots on the ground, like field crew, data collection, observations, some small installs and things like that. So as we talk about this breadth of stuff, just remember it's 6 individuals doing the large portion of this work. So one of the first and biggest things that we deal with is pedestrian safety. So this group, sorry, back one slide, Devin. So this group does reviews and recommendations of new and existing pedestrian crossings, makes recommendations about how to make them safer, how we control speeds at those crossings, how we reduce them. We do that both internally with our requests as well as working on Vital Streets projects, providing that safety aspect to theirs, to those projects. Sorry, still same slide. So that's all right. We work on the creation of capital projects to address pedestrian safety. We also work closely with Grand Rapids Public Schools and other charter schools and entities in the area to address their safety concerns. We also do the crossing guard reviews and recommendations for the Grand Rapids Police Department to implement for schools as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to those reviews, in terms of capital projects, I just threw together a crude map. But so every one of the markers on that map you see is 36 locations where in the next 3 years we'll be installing enhanced pedestrian crossing treatments. So that's rectangular rapid flashing beacons, in some cases overhead rectangular rapid flashing beacons, some pedestrian hybrid beacons, and in 2 cases actual traffic signals that are being installed specifically for the movement of pedestrians across major roadways. These are funded through a combination of grant funding, city capital projects, as well as partnerships with entities like Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., Corridor Improvement Authorities, and neighborhood associations. Next slide, please. So we also administer the Bicycle Action Plan and make sure its implementation gets worked into our capital program as well as Vital Streets projects. I mentioned Kristen Bennett previously. She almost single-handedly lifted this from nothing to what it is today. It was adopted by the Commission in 2019. Since that adoption, we've installed 19 new miles of facilities in addition to what had been installed before. The big shift in the Bicycle Action Plan is that those systems are not just simple bike lanes, but elevating them to safer conditions. So 5 of those 19 miles have been separated bicycle facilities. That's a combination of buffered bike lanes, raised bike lanes, and separated two-way facilities. And in addition to that, 3.5 miles of existing bike lanes have also been converted to those elevated, safer conditions. We are getting into the process of running an update of this. It's 5.5, almost 6 years old now, and so we need to make adjustments to what the network is currently and where we want to go. So one of those things being public feedback about the consideration of how they feel in standard bike lanes and wanting those to be more separated, buffered, safer condition facilities. We also have gone through an effort with a consultant pulling together a five-year capital plan for those bicycle projects totaling $15 million. I actually provided that to Commissioner Sessa this week, and I will be happy to share that with everyone else as well, so you have a list of those projects and the funding involved. Next slide, please. So we work really closely with the engineering department and all departments really in the Vital Streets plan. So we provide technical input on mobility and safety aspects of their projects. We attend all of the public meetings to provide mobility representation. And we also provide the metric reporting for the mobility items within the Vital Streets Oversight Commission metrics report every year. Vital Streets carves out approximately $675,000 for our department annually. This funds our neighborhood traffic calming program and provides a lot of the design and match funds for our grant projects. Sorry, go back one. So one thing to note for Vital Streets, it's funded through a bond initiative that runs out in 2030. This was originally, at least the funding portion of it was originally focused a lot around pavement condition. So we're really closely partnered with engineering as we look ahead to 2030 and what the next round of Vital Streets looks like, trying to get infrastructure standards and guidance that will flow into that next round of it to really implement things that we are looking at in terms of slowing vehicles down, moving people, making the mode shift from single occupancy users to all of these other wonderful things that we're talking about, looking at standards such as NACTO and how we can implement pieces, portions of all of that into our Vital Streets standards as well. So again, looking to make transportation facilities safer for all users and how that gets into a solidified bond grant funding source like Vital Streets. Next slide, please. Okay, so Jessica mentioned we do a lot of different funding sources in terms of city funds, but we also do a ton of our capital work through grant funds. So one of the funding types we work with is the Highway Safety Improvements Program. We do about $900,000 in projects through this grant funding annually, and is almost entirely non-motorized projects, or in the grant type is vulnerable users. So between 2024 and 2026, we secured $2.7 million in vulnerable user project funding, which is going to translate into 32 enhanced pedestrian crossing treatments. Again, those rectangular rapid flashing beacons, PED hybrid beacon style. Next slide, please. One of the grants we did put together recently under this same HSIP grant funding is the extension of the two-way separated facility on Turner. So the overall goal for this facility, which currently ends at 4th Street, is to extend all the way to Fulton into the GVSU campus. So this project through HSIP funding is the section between Pearl and Fulton, closest to GVSU, and also includes partnership and funding commitments from DGRI. Next slide, please. So GVMC has recently put out their next iteration of their transportation improvement program. So this identifies funding for communities between 2026 and 2029. So as part of that, we have $1.4 million in transportation alternatives program funding and $1.6 million in carbon reduction program funding. So it's going to do a number of things, but one of those is, again, the completion of the Turner Bike Facility. So these two funding sources will provide the funding for that middle section between 4th Street and Pearl. So once these are all complete, we'll have a two-way separated bike facility from Richmond all the way to Fulton, which is almost a consecutive 2-mile stretch that leads directly into a campus environment. Next slide, please. So one other funding source, congestion mitigation and air quality. So this is funding specifically addressed at reducing carbon emissions in air and improving air quality. We receive $250,000 annually for traffic signal timing optimization. So the primary use of that is to reduce delay of vehicles along corridors. But a couple of the things that allows us to do each time is when we review these traffic timing, we can implement safety measures as well. So like over the last few years, every time we've touched an intersection, we've introduced leading pedestrian intervals that allows a pedestrian to enter the intersection before the greens for vehicles, release the vehicles into the intersection, which is a proven safety countermeasure. It also allows us to do things like review all of our signal timing or our crossing timings, making sure that they're not only the current minimums allowed, but looking at context as well of land use in the area. So locations near senior homes and things might need additional time to do that. So we have a consultant do those reviews, not only for the timing, but the land use context sensitivity of those timing patterns. We also receive just under $700,000 annually to support our Regional Traffic Signal Management Center. This pays for operations, equipment, and management, the facilities that house it, and then the staff that operates it. Neighborhood traffic calming program, again, this funded through Vital Streets funding. We currently get $150,000 in annual funding. This program has historically been resident request driven, and whether or not implementation happens on a street was completely determined by speed and volume data collection. That program has installed 35 traffic calming devices in the last 5 years. We perform pre and post data collection to make sure that the devices we're installing is addressing the needs that was raised. And then we've also added a couple programs in recent years. We administered the speed feedback trailers you see in the lower left-hand corner, as well as we've purchased a bunch of temporary traffic control equipment to set up pilot and test traffic calming locations to allow neighborhoods to kind of experience what we're proposing before we go to the stage where they vote. Some of you that have been on this commission a little bit longer have probably seen portions of this, but, oh, sorry, next slide, Devin, thank you. We are still moving forward with trying to change this to a more proactive program. We have gone through a process of identifying neighborhood scoring and crash scoring for all of what we've designated as neighborhoods in this, you can see in the photo, throughout the city, and ranked them. We've gone through 2 rounds of data collection for the top 12 neighborhoods, so that's the top 4 scoring neighborhoods in each ward. We have developed concept plans for those and are ready to go to the neighborhoods with those plans. So the intention of this is for us to be looking at information ahead of time, identifying through the neighborhood scoring which neighborhoods have the most propensity to be impacted by speeding, and go to those neighborhoods with solutions prior to having to receive a complaint from them. And just as an example, between those 12 neighborhoods, we are basically set up with our concepts to install 83 devices over the next 2 years. So we're looking at 3 to 4 times the number of assistance to these neighborhoods with this proactive program as our reactive program. Okay. So Jessica's mentioned in previous reporting that our signals team maintains traffic signals not only in Grand Rapids but also in the surrounding community. So we currently have 270 flashers and traffic signals in Grand Rapids, but they also maintain 670 traffic signals and flashers in our surrounding community for MDOT, Kent County, Kentwood, and other agencies. My team's involvement in that has more to do with operation review, recommendations of locations, safety recommendations at those specific signals, and then development of standards for future installation and maintenance. Next slide, please. So we also oversee the annual pavement marking program to go through and refresh all of our pavement markings come spring. So long lines are all of your lane lines throughout the city, crosswalks and stop bars, and then symbols on the roadway. We are currently in year 4 of our durable pavement marking conversion. So we're getting to a point now where we're documenting condition of those throughout each year. And we're going to go through basically an asset management cycle determining which roadways constitute revisiting more often. There's plenty of roads that need to be hit every 2 years as opposed to every 4 years. And then in neighborhoods, those durable markings are lasting much longer and we can leave those for a little bit longer. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. So one other thing we're also doing is converting all standard crosswalk markings to continental or high visibility crosswalk markings. So the example on the left is typically 2 parallel bars. They're about 4 inches wide apiece. So as you can imagine, a vehicle going 25 miles an hour or faster in many cases, approaching these, it's not a whole lot of paint to see and acknowledge a crosswalk. The picture on your right, those are 12 inches wide and between 6 and 8 feet long. So there's just a lot more material on the ground. It's reflective paint, so even at night, just gives a lot more surface to identify that a crossing is there. Next slide, please. One of the other things we get to work with too is art in the public right-of-way. We have a sitting member from our team on the City Manager's Arts Advisory Committee. We provide technical expertise regarding mobility needs as it comes to art in the public right-of-way. And has led to a number of successful partnerships with community members and organizations, including DGRI and various neighborhood associations. And then I didn't make a slide for each one of these, but just a couple other hot button or like bullet items. We do site plan review for private development through the planning department. We administer temporary traffic control and detour coordination for not only city traffic or city construction projects, but also utility companies. We administer accessible parking permitting, loading zone permitting, oversized load permitting, and coordinate block parties. So we do quite a bit, but.
And just to bring back to that first slide, John does this whole program with 2 engineers, a planner, and 3 techs. And then me. I'm the other one that just helps fill in.
You do the block parties?
Obviously, the block party, that's me. No, so this is one of those teams that's, punching way out of their weight class, and I'm really proud of them. But I wanted to show you all this overview of what they're doing. And you guys have 20 minutes for questions, so please. He's here.
Did I talk that fast?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a 3-minute rant, and this is a lot of pent up thinking for me. So first of all, I would love to have a city policy that said anytime we put on a roundabout, we have to have pedestrian activated flashers at each quadrant of that roundabout, because blind people cannot tell when traffic is going to stop if it doesn't stop. So roundabouts are lethal for visually impaired people, and there's actually a lot of them in the community. So I think roundabouts have their place, but I think that I'd love to see retrofitted flashers at all the ones on Wealthy, for example. But as we put, at minimum, if we're going to put in new roundabouts, we have to realize we're stopping traffic stopping, and traffic stopping is really critical for some people. Second of all, as I'm running around town right now, I'm getting more and more sensitized to this. I am pretty much sure that at least 80% of our traffic lights, at least 80% of the 24 hours in the day could be four-way flashers, and then there would be more throughput. And the amount of time I spend sitting at traffic lights where I'm thinking, there's nobody coming on the other street. There's only me sitting here, and I've got to wait for a minute. I think we could get better throughput. I also think that four-way stops are incredibly useful for pedestrians. Nobody's ever tried to run me over at a four-way stop. People are most deferential, order of magnitude more deferential to pedestrians at four-way stops than they are anywhere else. I would also love to see a citizen-nominated process, maybe for converting things that feel like they're four-way stops but aren't into so there's a lot of two-way intersections. I'll give you an example. It always feels to me like the corner of Morris and Pleasant. It always feels like Morris is the dominant street. It's not. Pleasant is. So the number of times I've almost walked out into traffic there, that could be solved if that was a four-way stop. It's a very low traffic intersection, but like if everyone had to stop there, it would be safer. I'd love to see a comprehensive reexamination of like how often we can have things be four-way flashers. Like we all know it happens at 2 a.m. on lots of streets. It could happen a lot more often, I think, than it does now. I would love to see semi-permanent radar installations. In other words, not just the speed carts, but have them strapped to poles on streets that we know are problematic until the data shows us that we've fixed whatever way they're problematic. I often refer to those radars as speed shamers, because if I'm driving in East Grand Rapids and I pass one of those on Lake Drive and it flashes up the speed I'm actually going, not only do I see it, the car behind me sees it, and so they get to evaluate whether I'm a good person or not, and I want to be a good person, so I conform. Another thing I'd love to see is, and it can't be that expensive, I know we don't have money right now to like put four-way flashers, put flashers at all of our pedestrian crosswalks, but I was driving with somebody the other day who literally just drove right by on one of those, and there was a pedestrian waiting, and they were like, oh, we don't have to stop for those. So those yellow signs that are like, yo, dummy, this is really a crosswalk. I'd love to see every single crosswalk in the city have a yellow sign by it that says state law, you actually have to stop for pedestrians, because otherwise our crosswalks feel like options to get yourself killed. That's shocking to me what percentage of those things get ignored by drivers. And I get that the flashers are the best, but I also get that they're the most expensive. If I could wave a magic wand and have the money for it, I would have 1,000 of them installed in the city in the next 3 months. I get we have capacity issues, but in the meantime, I would love to see a drive to get a lot more of those yellow signs up, and I like the ones that say state law, not just a helpful little sign of the person, but one that just says there is a law involved here. You are breaking the law by not letting that pedestrian cross the road. So there's my rant. Thanks.
Any other rants?
So I don't want to necessarily dive into responding to all of that, and I'd love to come back and talk about those specific things. But so just one thing, we will be installing our first permanent or semi-permanent speed feedback sign. There's been research lately that, so I'll give you the history, which is they tend to become white noise after a while. I installed them at my former life at Scottsdale. Walker is dealing with it right now. Their PD moves them around because after several weeks, they become just like any other sign and become ignored. The research that I read recently, the one exception to that is locations where speeds change. So they have long-term effects where speeds are changing. So we'll be installing one at Ann and Monroe, eastbound as you come over the river and the bridge. It goes from 35, which I think is very hopeful that people are driving 45, but it changes to 25 across Monroe and goes into a residential characteristic. So we will be installing one there. I think the edges of our city where Kent County and Kentwood have much higher speeds coming in are other good locations and potential uses for that. And then we'll build from there. We'll make sure that data is doing what we intended to do. And then maybe we can revisit them other locations. I was hoping Walker would have a better answer for me, but they said, no, we left them up there, and at about 2 to 3 weeks, everything starts to go back to normal. So moving around has been most effective for them.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Updates? It's almost 10:02.
Yep, you have some updates in your packet. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks for your attention to that.
All right, next is public comment on other matters. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak, please step forward. All right, seeing none. Any general comments from the commission? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.